Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And I'm joined today by Joe. Joe, can you please introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background?
Sure. Hi, Dr. Gleb, and thank you for having me. I'm Joe Galvin. I'm the Chief Research Officer for Vistage International. Vistage provides executive coaching and peer advisory groups to CEOs and business leaders of small and mid-sized companies, both here in the States and in 44 other countries around the world. I've got the unique pleasure of being the Chief Research Officer, which gives me access to the insights from our community of CEOs, and their responses feed us the information and insight we need to create our reports that are always focused on what our members tell us is most important to them, the issues, topics, and decisions that they face every day, and how we can help them better understand that to make better decisions, become better leaders, and get better results.
Now, you recently put out a report on generative AI adoption by Vistage members. So tell me a little bit more about the overall picture from the report, the 30,000-foot view.
Yeah, the report that we created is based upon our theme, which is our concept that generative AI is the automation of the knowledge worker. We saw the impact of automation during the Industrial Revolution on artisans and craftsmen and workers as they were replaced by steam-powered engines that could work all day and all night. We now see that same effect for knowledge workers, where they're at knowledge workers we define as people who work with words, numbers, images, sound, or video, knowledge workers.
Mhm.
They can now easily automate aspects of what they do through generative AI. The mundane, the research work that they do, that can now be automated so they can focus their energies on understanding what that analysis and insight tells them and how it connects to their business rather than the drudgery, the data drudgery that we experience of trying to sort through and create the data so you can then figure out what the story is. So the concept really came from a time that I spent sitting in through a number of Vistage groups where we have a huge community of speakers, folks like yourself, who speak to our groups on a regular basis and have the opportunity to sit in person to four of these. And as much as the commentary that they made was interesting, what was more interesting to me was the reaction of the CEOs in the room. Now, these are rooms of 15, 16, 17 CEOs of very different businesses, all usually between 5 million and 100 million in size, and how they react to these varying things. And my recognition was that this is about automating knowledge work, that there will be easy gains, massive productivity gains, easy in the first part. And as you progress more, it becomes more difficult and more challenging. But what's exciting is to see and to be able to track through our data how our CEO community is gravitating towards the power of what generative AI can bring in driving productivity. My thesis is that individuals will figure out how to leverage generative AI for how they work today exponentially faster than the organization ever will. Our concept is that you should empower your workers with a tool, and I'm not your tool of choice, but most important is that you give them the freedom and flexibility to learn and experiment, along with the guidance, governance, guardrails, and security settings to ensure that their work is protected as you would in any IT environment. So release the Kraken, if you will, but empower your workers to figure out for themselves. I've not spoken to a single CEO or a single knowledge worker who hasn't found an easy, quick win that saves them hours or days in the very beginning. Now, again, the low fruit is easy to pick. As you climb higher in the tree, it becomes more and more challenging and more difficult. But right here, right now, there's a tremendous opportunity to drive the productivity of individuals by setting them free. The next layer would then be to focus on work groups. So we work together with three other people. How do we now take what we do and figure out ways that we can automate it? The concept here is pick the low fruit first and fast, and that's at work group. And at the organizational level, that's going to remain challenging. It's going to remain expensive and elusive. But the gains that can be delivered right now, I think, are focused from an individual's ability to harness its power and how they work today. And then we can go through those challenges, many of which you talk about in terms of how biases are applied, those challenges to be able to work through the work group and the organization.
Now, you've seen an increase in CEO investment and excitement about generative AI. Can you tell me a little bit about the numbers that you're seeing? What are the actual research that people are doing? What is the actual implementation that CEOs and key leaders are doing uh, by
Yeah.
the numbers in integrating generative AI into their companies?
Yes, much of this data is in our report. Our report's
Mm,
available at vistage.com at the Research Center. But an example is in Q1 of
mhm,
2023. So now we're what, 34 days after Gen AI, after ChatGPT was released. 41% thought it presented a tremendous opportunity.
mhm,
When asked that same question in Q4 of 24, 77%
mm,
said they saw that. So we're seeing growth there. We've seen reallocation of budgets. We're seeing
mhm,
budgets increases. 49% will increase their technology budget to accommodate for this, right? And the tools that they're using are the common tools. We see chat, we see Copilot, we see Claude, Gemini. The tools are there.
mhm,
I think the challenge that we see is less about tool selection and more
mhm,
about end users building the skills and competencies, I call it proficiency, to get better, to be able to use these
mhm,
tools. I think there's two limitations to Gen AI in today's world. One is imagination, and the other is time. It takes time for
mhm,
you to learn. It takes time for your Gen AI app of choice to learn from you. The cycle of you learn, it learns requires
mhm,
time and iteration. And again, as you talk to users, as they become more proficient, they become more in tune to where the specific capabilities of the tool they're using can be leveraged and where it can. I'd
mhm,
also point out that as amazing as some of these gains are, I personally experienced a 3.5 day saving just by helping
mhm,
me process open-ended questions. We're literally standing on the beach at Kitty Hawk watching the Wright Flyer take
mhm.
off. Wow, that's really cool. Because, 66 years later, we're standing on the moon.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's going to take 66 years to get to where
Mhm,
AI is taking us, but it certainly is moving at a crazy accelerated rate. And the disruption will reverberate through both our
mhm.
professional and our personal lives. One of the issues I know that you brought up and others have spoken to is the reluctance or the fear of workers.
Yeah.
I'm going to lose my job to AI. Well, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to someone who is better at using AI than you. The
Mhm,
amount of jobs that AI will create is roughly double the jobs that it will eliminate. And we can go back and make the metaphors and the analysis back to the horse-drawn carriages in New York City in 1900. And there's a picture of
mhm,
Fifth Avenue and it's full of horses and all the things that horses leave as emissions, as compared to 15 years later when there's only one horse and it's all cars. What
mhm,
happened to all those people taking care of horses, cleaning up after horses? Maybe they became cab drivers, maybe they did something else,
mhm,
but they found a way. The point that I wanted to make here is that there are people in every organization who are actively embracing and engaging this, whether leaders know it or
mhm.
not. So let's shine a light. Let's take that out of the dark and let them use it. There are other people who are truly fearful. And it's these people I'm concerned about most because if they are not willing
Yeah.
to embrace and adapt how to leverage this tool and the tools that follow on, then yeah, they'll be eliminated. And it's not because of AI,
Mhm,
it's because of their inability, fear, or whatever that prevents them from jumping in with both feet and learning how to use these type of capabilities
mhm,
because they're absolutely game changing. I grew up professionally in the 80s. My first job was
mhm,
Xerox in 1984. I call it the end of analog selling because we shortly thereafter technology started to come in.
mhm,
And I saw that in real time as I lived it. Now I look at this and I say, there are parallels, but the speed of this is just crazy.
mhm, mhm,
Um, so I think the general awareness by leaders and workers are, yeah, this is something cool, but how much time are they willing to commit to
mhm,
learn this? Because that's your big restriction. Committing the time to understand, to learn, to engage, and to train your model. And I think that's
mhm,
one of the big things that we're trying to send in this message is that it's moving really quick. Empower the individual to automate how they work today, then work with
mhm,
small groups, pick the low fruit first and fast, and knowing that elusive, organizational level AI stuff, especially in small and mid-sized businesses,
mhm,
will still be hard and elusive and challenging and expensive. But don't miss the boat on the productivity boost that Gen AI
mhm.
can give you today.
I think one of the challenges when I talk to a lot of business leaders, a lot of CEOs, Vistage members, is that the business leaders are really excited about it. Like you said, 77% believe it's going to be really beneficial for their business. but they tend to underestimate the fears and anxieties of their employees. And so when they say, hey, go out and play with it and experiment with it, a lot of employees just don't because they're afraid and they're anxious. And we saw from the report that there's actually really little training provided by the companies on this topic. I think something like only 20% bring in external experts. And so the rest rely on their internal expertise, which honestly, let's be honest, the vast majority of Vistage members do not have internal expertise in generative AI. Just because the CEO figured out how to write an email faster doesn't mean that they have expertise in how to actually apply the tools of generative AI in their marketing department, in their sales department, in their HR, to manufacturing, lots and lots of areas where it's not applicable. And of course, they don't know about the ethics and the risks, all of these sorts of challenges. So a lot of CEOs who think and say, just do experiment with it, they're not realizing the challenge of experimenting with it without providing training and without providing guardrails. What do you say about that?
I absolutely agree with what you say. And it's interesting. Again, this is anecdotal only because I haven't been able to document, but having sat through, 6 different Vistage meetings with 15 or so CEOs in each
Mhm.
room. As you go through the dialogue, what I began to see was those CEOs who had personally used it, their businesses were further down the path of embracing it.
Mhm.
And those CEOs that says, I do ceramic tile or I do some, legacy type thing, and will never play in there. Their businesses are nowhere with that.
Yeah.
And the key here is that the leadership comes from the top. And it's
Mhm.
important to acknowledge that in any organization, you're going to have leading edge people who are already using this capability.
Mhm.
They may not know it, it may be done in the dark, but it's being used.
Sure.
My concept is let's open the curtain on that. Let's see how
Mhm.
people are using it. And let's also understand that just like learning how to use email or learning how to access the web through a browser were
Mhm.
skills that people develop slowly over time, many reluctantly, those same behaviors are going to apply to people learning how to use
Mhm.
Gen AI. At a base level, you've got, I call it, you're AI curious. I've heard of AI. I've learned how to spell AI, but I haven't really
Mhm.
done anything with it. The next level is level 1, and this is what I call browser behaviors. This is where people jump in and they ask questions like they would ask a browser.
Mhm.
Like, what is the nature of this? And
Mhm.
a browser will give you 17 things to read through, and then generative AI will give you an answer to what that is. So you ask simple questions to get simple responses, tapping into the knowledge that resides in a large
Mhm.
language model of whatever tool of choice. The next level is when you begin to ask more sophisticated questions. And it's called
Mhm.
level 2. This is where prompt skills come in, where I've now learned how to ask a prompt that is detailed, specific, specifies the voice,
Mhm.
all those characteristics to get a deeper, richer answer. The next level up then is where you begin to import your data. This is
Mhm.
now where you move to a more secure model where you want to have your data, whatever you're working with, not part of that large language model. And I'll pause for a minute on this because one of the concepts I have is that as a worker, regardless of where you are in the
Mhm.
organizational hierarchy, um, as a worker, you have to ask yourself, what is it that I uniquely provide that AI can't replicate? What do
Mhm.
you have that doesn't exist in that large language model? Because if you don't
Mhm.
have a unique capability, yeah, clock's ticking on your career.
Mhm.
Clock's ticking on you. So consequently, what do you have that's truly unique? So speaking
Mhm.
for myself, what I have is I have a community of CEOs across the country and around the world that will answer questions and tell me
Mhm.
what they're doing. AI can't do that. I
Mhm.
also have 23 years of data. We've been tracking CEO responses to a variety of issues, and
Mhm.
AI can't have that unless I give it to them. So this comes back to the point about as you move to that next level of sophistication
Mhm.
and you start asking better questions, you now need to put the guardrails you put in place, the governance, but most importantly, the security, so that your
Mhm.
proprietary company-specific data that AI will only get if you give it to it, you can now that's your leverage. Because at the next level, this is where
Mhm.
you move to a model where I'm now going to import my data. Here's my data, here's whatever it is I'm going to put in. I want that secure. I don't want that to contribute to that large language model, but I want to
Mhm.
be able to use the technology of AI to be able to use these prompts to now pull those insights, from my data. And that's a huge transition when you learn how to load up your data, learn how to ask those questions, build those
Mhm.
prompts, and do it in a way that gives you a unique level of insight into your private data. And then the fourth level is when you get to what I call, apps or needs task specific, meaning this for that. I use this application to record meetings. I use this to generate
Mhm.
video avatars. I use this to do that. That's where you move up that skill paradigm. And a question that's in my mind as I've gone through this is how many CEOs, how many business leaders have the time to get to that level of proficiency,
Mhm.
to truly to be able to leverage that? Or do they need help doing that? And I think the answer is they probably need help doing that. But if you think about where this goes, once you get past, the input, now you get into agentic AI and the multimodal
Yeah.
AI, and those things that are still on the horizon. But again, in
Mhm.
the short term, both individually and collectively, this becomes an inflection point where we move forward. I think
Mhm.
it's just really interesting to see how CEOs and leaders are embracing this and how that
Mhm.
translates to the company. I made this comment when presenting this at an event in Louisville earlier in the month, and it was specific to, how are you using this individually? How is
Mhm.
this happening in your world, and what are you doing? And again, there's a few folks that stand up and say, we're doing this and we're doing that. And others are nodding their head saying, yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty
Mhm.
cool. So I think we're in the very early days.
Mhm.
I think there's a tremendous opportunity for individuals to figure it out for themselves. And as a leader, you'd want to know who those people are, and more importantly, the people that aren't playing in this game, because
Mhm.
I think those are the ones that are most at risk.
Now, when leaders are thinking about trying out generative AI, what kind of metrics should they be using? What's the ROI that they should be measuring?
Well, ROI and productivity metrics are obviously in the eye of the beholder. But I think the
Mhm.
first metric to think about is time. How much
Mhm.
time are you investing in learning how to use your Gen AI app of choice? We'll just call it chat,
Mhm.
right? How much time are you learning to move from being AI curious to move past browser behaviors to begin to ask good prompts
Mhm.
to now apply this technology to your data? And maybe it's not the CEO, maybe it's the people in his
Mhm.
organization. But we say to CEOs, don't ask how, ask where. Where can you use
Mhm.
this? Where could it make a difference in your business? Where can it save
Mhm.
time? So the response to your question is, number one metric is how much time are you investing to
Mhm.
learn how to use this? Because unlike a browser, where it's pretty easy to ask a question and get a list of stuff, that didn't take
Mhm.
long to learn. This will require a long time to learn.
Mhm.
And it will continue to evolve and require more learning, which comes back to the human side of this about
Mhm.
embracing change, accepting the speed of change, and wanting to be in front.
Mhm.
Because to stay behind is to be left behind.
Mhm.
And that's how fast this is moving.
Now, you talked about the CEOs not being realistically able to learn all of these things. So CEOs thus need to motivate employees and incentivize them and reward them. What kind of incentives, reward, recognition are effective in the area of generative AI to get for CEOs to think about how do I incentivize people to engage with generative AI effectively?
We haven't seen that effect yet
Mhm.
in terms of how CEOs are rolling this out. What I've seen most commonly is that they are put out there and with the guardrails and security, and people kind of figure it out for themselves. So
Mhm.
I think that's one approach. I think more
Mhm.
importantly, um, more importantly, you have to use it yourself, and
Mhm.
you have to be able to encourage and inspire people to use it.
Mhm.
For those who are using it, the advantage they see is in the quality of their work, the speed of their work.
Mhm.
It connects to another concept around engagement, and that is that employee engagement's always been an important predictor of retention.
Mhm.
But now you've got workers who are able to take a 3-day task and turn that into a 3-hour task.
Mhm.
Well, what do they do with the balance of that time? Because they save 2 days and 5 hours. Well, engaged employees will take that time to do more, dig deeper, create higher
Mhm.
quality, right? Improve the quality of what they deliver. Because a
Mhm.
knowledge worker, you do your research, you do your analysis, and then you communicate it in email, in a
Mhm.
webinar, in a PowerPoint, in talking. those that are using it will see that advantage and that will be reflected versus those that don't. So your
Mm.
question becomes, your engaged employees are the same
Mhm.
people that are probably on the edge using this.
Mhm.
Your disengaged employees are either not using it, or if they do use it, their personal productivity gains, well, they're over here playing more golf or doing more of this or doing
Mhm.
more of that. So it feeds all back into this human dynamic of how we embrace and accept change and how a powerful productivity tool like this can ramp people's careers up really quick and be an
Mhm.
advantage for them, and how other
Mhm.
people could sit on the sidelines because, today it's a competitive advantage.
Mhm.
Tomorrow it's a competitive requirement. And next
Mhm.
week, it's disqualifying if you can't do
Mhm.
this. I can remember back in the 90s when we were hiring salespeople. We would ask, Ernesto, do you have computer skills? No. Okay, well, don't worry. The next year, do you have computer skills? No. Okay, we'll treat you. The third year, do you have computer skills? No, disqualified.
Mhm.
And you'll see that same process as leaders and hiring managers begin to understand that this is a
Mhm.
skill set that will be a requirement of the knowledge worker. So
Mhm.
I think that's one of the paradigm shifts that we're going to see. As amazing as this technology is, it's the change behind it that drives the human
Mhm.
behavior that's required to realize the productivity gains. And again, it will get harder as you move up the progression, but at the
Mhm.
same time, that's where the value comes in.
Mhm. Yeah, especially with the new agentic AI, as you mentioned. So
Yeah.
as we finish up, is there anything else that you wish to share about generative AI adoption right now or in the future with agentic AI that you haven't yet talked about that would be relevant for CEOs to know?
Yeah, I would comment on the fact that we're at an inflection point.
Mhm.
Inflection points occur when an event or a series of events change the trajectory of humanity. Sometimes you recognize them and sometimes you don't. For me, I was with Xerox in New York City. I had a legal
Mhm.
assignment, and Xerox had introduced a new product called the 620 Memory Writer. And Dr. Gleb, you will not believe this when I tell you this, but it had two and a half, I'm not kidding, 2.5 pages of memory.
Mhm.
And I was replacing the IBM Correcting Selectric, which cost $995 with a $2,000 electronic typewriter, like crazy. That to me, I should have recognized at that point, that's the change. Well, when
Mhm.
chat came out in November of 22, that's the inflection point.
Yeah.
And so you stand before an inflection point, and you can choose to step through and get to the other side, or you can
Mhm.
choose to stand back and watch. But as I said before, to stay behind is to be left behind. And
Mhm.
while today you can do that, next week you won't. And
Mhm.
that's this is changing everything.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, Joe. This was super
Uh,
helpful.
my pleasure, Dr. Levin. Thank you for what you do in our community and your willingness to share your work with our people. Everyone appreciates it. And I personally look forward to and learn from your content every time I'm exposed to it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
My
Thank you,
pleasure.
Joe. And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps other people discover the show and helps us improve the show. And if you have any questions, as always, email me at gleb, Gleb, at disasteravoidanceexperts.com.